There are many different types of sewing machines available today. Some are mechanical, and some are electronic or computerized. Regardless of the machine model you have, there are basic parts that nearly all sewing machines have in common. These parts may be located in different places on the machine, depending on model, but their functions will essentially be the same. Consult your machine manual for specific location of these parts on your model. The hand wheel is located on the right side of the machine and is used to manually move the needle up and down. Always turn it toward you or counterclockwise. Turn the hand wheel to lower the needle down into the fabric when pivoting or turning corners. The needle should be raised out of the fabric for removing work from the machine, when choosing a new stitch pattern, or for threading. Some electronic or computerized machines have a needle up-down feature, which means the needle will always stop in the down position if the feature is activated. Check your machine manual for specifics on your model if it has this feature. Sewing machines have a selection of stitches from which to choose. Some machines are designed to sew only basic stitches, while others add a selection of stretch stitches and decorative stitches. Some electronic or computerized models may also offer alphanumeric patterns for sewing letters and numbers. On mechanical machines, stitches are selected by moving a lever or dial. Once the stitch has been selected, you will need to then manually set the stitch length and stitch width setting for that stitch, depending on the look you want. On electronic or computerized machines, the optimal stitch length and stitch width are set automatically when the stitch is selected, but you can adjust these if you wish. The stitch length control can be adjusted to sew stitches shorter or longer. Shorter stitches are better for lighter weight fabrics or when you are working with a finer thread and needle. Longer stitches are better for heavier fabrics or thread or when working with a larger needle. On mechanical machines, stitch length is adjusted by moving a dial. On electronic or computerized machines, though the optimal setting is set upon selection of the stitch, further adjustment of the stitch length is done with either a lever or with push buttons, depending on machine model. The stitch width control can be set to make stitches sew narrower or wider, depending on the look you want. For mechanical machines, this is done by turning a dial or lever. For electronic or computerized machines, though the optimal setting is set upon the selection of the stitch, further adjustment of the stitch width can be done either with a lever or by push button. For most machines, you can also use the stitch width control to adjust the position of the needle when the machine is set for straight stitch. The reverse sewing control is used for sewing stitches in reverse. You can use the reverse lever or button to secure the beginning and end of a seam to keep the stitches from coming undone. On some electronic or computerized machines, the reverse sewing control can also be used to tie off decorative machine stitches. The machine's presser foot is the part of the machine that comes in contact with the fabric from the top. When the presser foot lifter is lowered, the presser foot comes down and puts pressure on the fabric. The presser foot works with the feed dogs, which are like little rows of teeth under the fabric, to draw the fabric through from the bottom side. Sewing machines come with a general purpose or all-purpose presser foot already on the machine. In addition, there is a large variety of optional presser feet available for various sewing functions. Many of these will be shown later in this program. The presser foot lifter is used to raise and lower the presser foot. The presser foot lifter also controls the tension discs, which are located inside the machine. This is important because by raising the presser foot lifter, the tension discs can receive the thread. Once the machine is threaded, fabric is placed under the foot for sewing. The presser foot is then lowered, putting tension on the thread. The take-up lever is the part of the machine that pulls thread through the upper thread tension control while the stitch is being formed. On some machines, the take-up is visible, and on some it is concealed. On some models, the thread take-up is even controlled digitally. Feed dogs are located under the presser foot. They move in a front-to-back motion to draw the fabric through the machine as you sew. There may be times when you need to disengage the feed dogs, for example when free motion sewing to do stipple quilting. In this case, you manually control the fabric movement. Some machines have a drop feed feature, which means that you can simply raise or lower the feed dogs as needed. If your machine does not have the drop feed feature, the feed dogs will need to be covered for free motion sewing. Use a feed dog cover plate, sometimes called a darning plate, to keep the fabric from coming in contact with the feed dogs. To re-engage feed dogs that have been lowered, release the lever or switch, and then turn the handwheel counterclockwise 1 full revolution. The needle plate is also called a stitch plate. It sits on the bed of the machine around the feed dogs. It has a hole in it through which the needle passes while sewing. There are seam guide lines on the needle plate and sometimes on the bobbin cover plate to help you guide the edge of the fabric accurately when sewing whichever seam allowance you need. The seam allowance is the distance from the stitching line to the raw edges of the fabrics. Some machines indicate these specific seam allowance measurements directly on the plate, while others have evenly spaced lines as guides. Now that you have become familiar with the basic parts of your Singer sewing machine, you'll need some basic tools for successful sewing of any project. Be sure to use good quality scissors. This is important so that fabric is cut accurately. There are several types available, such as larger shears for cutting fabric, or smaller scissors for more detailed things such as trimming threads or clipping corners and curves. Use good quality pins for holding fabrics together when you sew, so you don't snag fabric or make holes in it. A fabric marking pen or chalk pencil is really helpful for things like marking buttonholes and pocket or applique placement. A rotary cutter, mat, and ruler are must-haves, especially for quilting. But these can also be used for things like cutting accurate bias strips for covered piping, used in some garments or home deck projects. You'll find a tape measure very handy for all kinds of projects, large or small. For fashion sewing, a dress form can be one of the most useful tools in your sewing room. Not only will it help you sew more accurately, but it will look great in your sewing space. Pressing is an essential part of sewing, so you will need an ironing board and steam iron. Get the best that your budget will allow. You might also consider a steam press, which is great not only for ironing larger surfaces quickly, but for fusing stabilizers and interfacing, setting creases, and much more. You'll do your best sewing when your sewing space is organized. Keeping your sewing tools organized and handy will make your sewing even more enjoyable. Now, just add fabric and thread and you're ready to go. When selecting fabric for a project, choose fabric that is suitable for the project. If you use a commercial pattern, there are fabric recommendations on the back of the pattern envelope to help guide you. Fabric has a right side and a wrong side. If it seems difficult to tell the difference between right and wrong on a fabric, usually you can just use the side you prefer. Fabric has a lengthwise grain, which runs parallel to the selvage edge, and a crosswise grain, which runs perpendicular to the selvage. Pay attention to grain line when sewing so that your finished project hangs or drapes correctly when constructed. Bias is any other angle across the fabric surface that is not lengthwise or crosswise grain. A 45-degree angle is referred to as true bias. Fabric strips cut on true bias are used to cover piping, finished curved edges, and make quilt bindings. There are lots of different types of threads available for different sewing applications. Some are suited for basic sewing, and some are more suited for decorative work. For regular sewing, you can use the same thread in the needle as you do in the bobbin. For some decorative applications, you can use a lighter weight thread in the bobbin and a heavier weight or decorative thread in the needle. A good basic thread for general sewing is a cotton-covered polyester thread, also called all-purpose thread. For quilting, a 100% cotton thread is usually the best choice. Decorative stitches take on a whole new look when you use rayon thread because it has a nice sheen. You can use all-purpose thread in the bobbin while decorative stitching. Polyester threads can be used for decorative stitching or for stretch fabrics. Top stitching thread is a heavier weight thread often used for decorative embellishment. It can also be used for things like hemming jeans or for making buttonholes. Metallic threads provide a beautiful decorative embellishment. For best results, use a Singer Style 2000 universal needle. Although these are average size needles, the eye is larger to accommodate the metallic thread. This will help keep the thread from shredding while sewing. There are various styles of sewing machine needles because different needles are used for different sewing functions. Also, needles come in a range of sizes or thicknesses depending on the type of fabric being sewn. Your machine's instruction manual may have a chart which gives recommendations for which needles are best for various fabrics. Needles are referred to as being ballpoint or regular point. Ballpoint needles are designed to sew stretch fabrics. Their special design prevents stitches from skipping on fabrics that have an elastic quality. However, using a ballpoint needle on a woven fabric, like silk or cotton, can cause fabric threads to snag or pull. Regular point needles are designed for non-stretch fabrics. Their special design pierces through woven fabrics cleanly, producing excellent stitch quality. Using a regular point needle on a stretch fabric could cause runs in the fabric or skipped stitches. Needles come in various sizes too. A smaller number means a thinner needle, used for lighter weight fabrics. A larger number means the needle is thicker. Larger needles are best for medium to heavyweight fabrics. For denim or canvas, it is best to use at least a size 16 needle, which will help keep the needle from bending or breaking in the fabric. Needles should be changed if they become bent or dull, or if the tip should become damaged. It is recommended to use Singer brand needles in your Singer sewing machine. To change a needle, loosen the needle clamp screw. remove the old needle and discard it. Check to see that the flat side of the shaft is toward the back. Insert the new needle, making sure it goes all the way up into the slot. Then, tighten the needle clamp screw. A twin needle is a special needle designed so that two needles share one needle shaft. You can create unique stitch effects with this needle, as well as do professional-looking hems. Twin needles come in various widths and are available from your Singer retailer. To sew with a twin needle, first remove the standard needle from the machine. Insert the twin needle and be sure to tighten the needle clamp screw. Place the auxiliary spool pin on the machine. If you don't have an auxiliary spool pin, check with your Singer retailer to find the right one for your machine model. Now set one thread spool on the auxiliary spool pin and one on the regular spool pin. Thread both of the threads together as though they are one until you come to the needle threader. Manually place one thread into each of the two sides of the twin needle. For hemming, set the stitch width dial to the straight setting. Turn up the hem, pin in place, then sew on the right side of the garment. For a decorative effect, choose your stitch, then set the stitch width dial to a narrower width setting. Before sewing, turn the hand wheel manually to make sure the needle does not hit the sides of the foot. A hem stitching needle, sometimes called a wing needle, has a unique design. There are extensions, or wings, along each side of the needle. As you sew, these wings push the fibers of the fabric open, creating small holes within the stitching. For best results, use woven fabrics like linen or cotton. Universal needles are especially useful for working with specialty threads, such as metallic thread. Universal needles have an eye that is longer than that of a regular needle, which helps prevent the threads from shredding or breaking while sewing. In this part of the program, we'll give you some suggestions that will help you thread your machine properly. By following some simple guidelines, you'll find it easy to get your machine ready to sew. The machine bobbin is threaded before the upper part of the machine is threaded. Machines vary from model to model with regard to the bobbin winding and threading process, so check your machine manual for the correct procedure on your machine. Here are a few basic rules that apply to all machines. When you place thread on the machine, use the spool cap that is appropriate in size for the thread spool being used. If your thread spool has a slit on the end, be sure that end of the spool is on the right so your thread doesn't get caught while winding the bobbin. Use only the bobbins recommended by your machine manufacturer. Do not substitute different styles of bobbin or your machine may not sew properly. Check that the bobbin winding spindle is pushed fully to the left before you place the bobbin onto it. Be sure you place the bobbin into the machine correctly according to your manual. If you put the bobbin in the wrong way, the machine will not sew properly. Though machines vary from model to model as far as their specific threading paths, there are some common things that apply to all machines concerning the threading of the upper part of the machine. Follow your machine's manual or quick start guide for the rest of the threading process for your specific model. First of all, be sure that you raise the presser foot lifter before you begin threading. This is very important because if you don't, the thread will not go into the tension properly. Step number 1 for threading your machine should always be raise the presser foot lifter. Turn the hand wheel to raise the needle to its highest position. When you place the thread spool on the machine, use the spool cap that is appropriate in size for the thread spool being used. If your thread spool has a slit on the end, be sure that end of the spool is on the right so your thread doesn't get caught while sewing. If you are using a cone-shaped spool of thread, it is recommended to place the thread on a thread stand behind the machine for best results. 90% of your sewing will be done with your tension control set in the normal or automatic range as indicated by the instruction manual for your model of machine. The correct appearance of your stitching is mostly determined by the balanced tension of both top and bobbin threads. For straight stitch sewing, the tension is well balanced when these two threads lock in the middle of the fabric layers you are sewing. If, when you start to sew, you find that the stitching is irregular, you will need to adjust the tension control. Do this, however, only after you have determined that the machine has been correctly threaded. If the bobbin thread is showing on the top side of the fabric, or the fabric is puckering, adjust the upper thread tension control to a looser setting. If the needle thread is showing on the bottom side of the fabric, adjust the upper thread tension control to a tighter setting. Make all tension control adjustments with the presser foot in the down position. If you notice that there is a lot of thread accumulating on the bottom side of the fabric, this is an indication that the machine has not been correctly threaded. For more information about this, go to the Maintenance and Troubleshooting section of this program. For zigzag or decorative stitching, upper thread tension should be less than that for straight stitch sewing. You will always obtain a nicer stitch and less puckering when the upper thread appears slightly on the bottom side of your fabric for these types of stitches. The bobbin tension has been correctly set at the factory, so you do not need to adjust it. When threading the machine, raise the needle to its highest position by turning the hand wheel counterclockwise. Set the needle to center needle position. Always thread the needle from front to back and pull about 6 to 8 inches of thread toward the back. This will ensure that the machine doesn't come unthreaded when you start to sew because the thread tail was too short. Some machines feature a built-in needle threader to help you thread the needle quickly and effortlessly. To use an automatic needle threader, the threading lever is pressed, bringing the threading mechanism into position so that the hook comes into the eye of the needle. Thread goes around the thread guide and then up into the hook. Release the threading lever and a thread loop will pull through the needle's eye. Grab the thread loop and pull the rest of the thread tail through the needle. Some models make this process even faster because they have a threading system that will do this process for you. Check your machine manual or Quick Start Guide for more information on your model. Automatic needle threaders work best with needles that are size 14 or larger. For size 11 or smaller needles, as well as twin needles or hem stitching needles, it is recommended to just thread the needle manually. Before you start sewing, you will need to raise the bobbin thread. To do this, hold the upper thread with your left hand. Turn the hand wheel toward you or counterclockwise, which will lower and then raise the needle. As you turn the hand wheel, lightly pull the needle thread. The bobbin thread will be drawn up through the hole in the stitch plate. Slip the threads into the groove on the foot, then place both threads under the foot toward the back. On some machines, the groove is in front of the foot, and on others, it is on the side. Some machines have a track in which the bobbin thread is staged when threading. If your machine has this style of bobbin threading system, it means that it won't be necessary to draw up the bobbin thread before you begin to sew. The machine will pick it up for you automatically. Basic sewing stitches on most machines include the straight stitch, zigzag, blind hem, and multi-stitch zigzag. We'll show you how to use some of these basic stitches in this part of the program. However, most of your sewing will be done with the straight stitch. To sew a basic seam, place the fabric under the presser foot with the edge of the fabric at the right lined up with the seam guideline you want. The top edge of the fabric should be under the needle area. Before you step on the foot controller to sew, put the presser foot lifter down. You are now ready to sew. Step on the foot controller and sew a few stitches. Press the reverse sewing control to sew a few stitches in reverse. This will secure the seam to keep the stitches from coming undone. Release the reverse sewing control to sew forward again. Do the same procedure to finish a seam. To remove your sewing from a mechanical machine, turn the hand wheel toward you or counterclockwise until the needle is in its highest position, then continue turning it counterclockwise until the needle just slightly begins to go down again. Most electronic machines automatically bring the needle to its correct position for removing fabric from the machine. Raise the presser foot and then remove your work from the machine. The zigzag stitch has many applications. It is very popular, however, for machine applique. In this case, the zigzag stitch width is set according to the look you want for the project. The stitch length is set to a very short stitch length setting so that you don't see fabric between the stitches. Use a satin foot when doing machine applique because it has a groove along the bottom that allows dense stitching to pass freely. The multi-stitch zigzag has many applications, but is often used for repairing tears. To do this, place a reinforcement fabric on the back side of the tear to stabilize. Select a wide width setting, but select a fairly short length setting. Sew over the center of the tear. Now stitch again along each side of the tear to secure. Most machines have a selection of stretch stitches. These stitches are mainly used to sew fabrics with an elastic quality like those used to make activewear and swimwear. Most mechanical machines with stretch stitches require you to set a lever or dial to the stretch stitch mode in order to select the stretch pattern. Electronic or computerized machines automatically set the stitch for stretch sewing when the stretch stitch is selected. Let's take a closer look at a couple of these stretch stitches. The overedge stretch stitch makes a seam and seam finish at the same time. It's great for projects like activewear when it's important that the seams stretch with the fabric. Sew the seam, then trim the excess fabric when finished. The honeycomb stitch works great when applying elastic to all sorts of projects like garments, home dec, and even crafts. Narrower widths of elastic can be placed through the hole of the presser foot so they extend out toward the back. Hold the back end of the elastic with one hand and pull the other end toward you, stretching as you sew. Decorative stitches are mainly used for fabric embellishment. Some basic stitches and stretch stitches can also be used decoratively. Sewing different combinations of stitches can create interesting effects on clothing, crafts, or home dec projects. Various types of thread can transform the way stitches look, or you can combine stitches to create border effects or surface texture. Use a fabric stabilizer when doing decorative stitching to prevent the stitches from tunneling or distorting. Let's take a look at some ways to do decorative stitching. By using a heavier weight thread, like 12-weight cotton or top stitching thread, you can apply beautiful texture to your stitching. Just be sure to use a larger size needle so the thread will pass freely through it. You can also stitch over various types of ribbons and trims. Try a polyester or rayon thread for the stitches to have a nice sheen. Sew directly over the trim or sew along each side of the trim, depending on the effect you want to achieve. Mirror image, available on some models of electronic or computerized machines, allows you to flip some decorative stitches on your project. Not only does this offer greater creative possibilities, but mirroring the stitch can make it easier to sew the stitch in hard-to-reach areas. You can give your stitches a three-dimensional look by sewing with heavier threads or silk ribbon in the bobbin. Use things like ribbon floss or 2mm silk ribbon in the bobbin, and use all-purpose thread or polyester thread in the needle. Hand wind the ribbon onto the bobbin, then place the bobbin into the machine. You can thread it into the bobbin case tension for a tighter look, or bypass the bobbin tension for a more relaxed appearance. Apply a stabilizer to the wrong side of the fabric. Mark the stitching line on the stabilizer because you will sew with the right side of the fabric facing down. Use a large eye hand needle to bring the ribbon to the wrong side, then tie off to finish. There are many styles of buttonholes available on machines today, but the most popular style is the bar tack buttonhole. Buttonholes can be sewn in 1 step, 4 steps, or manually, depending on the machine model, using the appropriate buttonhole foot. Check your machine manual to find out which buttonhole styles your machine is designed to sew. 1-step buttonholes are not only faster than a 4-step or manual buttonhole, they provide more consistent results because the buttonhole is actually formed by measuring the button itself. To make a fully automatic 1-step buttonhole on a mechanical machine, set the pattern selector to the buttonhole icon. Set the stitch length and stitch width controls to the buttonhole indicators. The button is placed in the foot to determine buttonhole size. Some models stitch the buttonhole from bottom to top and others from top to bottom, so check your manual to determine how to do correct placement on the fabric. Engage the buttonhole lever. Sew the buttonhole. To make an automatic 4-step buttonhole on a mechanical machine, set the pattern selector to step 1 of the process. Set the stitch length and width controls to the buttonhole indicators. Place the buttonhole foot on the machine. Mark the buttonhole on the fabric, then position the foot over the fabric. Sew the first step of the buttonhole. With the needle raised out of the fabric, turn the pattern selector to step 2, then sew. When step 2 is complete, raise the needle out of the fabric and set the pattern selector for step 3. When step 3 is sewn, raise the needle out of the fabric and select step 4. Sew step 4. Depending on the model of machine, the order of the 4 steps may vary, but the results will be the same. To sew a fully automatic 1-step buttonhole on an electronic or computerized machine, select the buttonhole from the pattern selection. Place the buttonhole foot on the machine and then place the button in the foot to determine buttonhole size. Engage the machine's buttonhole lever. Position the foot on the fabric, then sew. The entire buttonhole will be sewn, and on most models we'll also sew a tie-off stitch to secure. Some machines offer a manual buttonhole feature, which means that buttonholes can be sewn in any length. The size of the buttonhole is not limited by the size of a buttonhole foot. Instead, a satin foot is used to sew the length you want. Buttonholes can be made more stable by adding cord. Hold the cord in a loop and place it on the extension at the back of the foot. Place the two ends of the cord into the grooves on the front of the foot. Hold the cords, then stitch the buttonhole. When finished, pull the cord loop into the buttonhole. Trim the loose ends, or use a large hand needle to bring them to the back of the fabric, then tie to secure. Buttonholes aren't just for buttons. Why not use them instead of grommets to make a shower curtain? Or sew several on a pillow, tote bag, or garment to create a path through which you can weave ribbon for added interest. There is a large variety of presser feet available for machines today. Some may come with your machine, while others may be purchased separately. Some feet simply snap on or off the machine, and some are removed by pressing a lever or button on the shank. Others are attached to a shank and need to be removed together using a small screwdriver. Here's how to change different styles of presser feet. Some machines have a shank with a release button or lever. This is pressed so that the foot releases. Place the desired foot on the needle plate, aligning the foot holder with the presser foot pin. Lower the presser foot lifter so that the foot holder snaps onto the foot. Some feet already have the shank attached, so it will be necessary to remove the shank currently on the machine in order to put the new foot on. Use a small screwdriver to loosen the shank on the machine and completely remove the screw. Set the new foot and shank in place, then replace the screw and tighten it securely. Let's take a look at some different presser feet. The satin foot, or applique foot, has many uses. It is commonly used for projects where the decorative stitching is very dense. This foot has a tunnel or groove on the underside, allowing densely sewn stitches to pass freely under it. The most common use for the satin foot is applique. Appliques are normally applied to a project using either a blanket stitch or a dense satin stitch. Secure the applique to the base fabric with either a fusible web or with fabric spray adhesive. Place tearaway stabilizer under the base fabric to help the dense stitches sew smoothly. Stitch around the applique, stopping to pivot at corners and curves. When the zipper foot is attached to the machine, the straight stitch can be used to insert zippers. The zipper foot has a left side and a right side, so that you can sew with the needle to the left or right of the foot, depending on your project. There are several types of zipper applications, but we'll show you one application called the centered zipper. Sew the seam of the garment, but machine baste the part of the seam where the zipper will be inserted with a long straight stitch. Press the seam open. Remove the regular presser foot and attach the zipper foot so it is to the right of the needle. Place the zipper face down on the seam with the zipper coil directly on the seam line and the top stop about 3/4 to 1 inch below the top edge. Machine baste the zipper in place. Now, with a regular straight stitch, sew across the bottom of the zipper, pivot, and then stitch up the side of the zipper. Now move the zipper foot so it is to the left of the needle, then stitch the bottom, pivot, and sew up the other side of the zipper. Remove the basting. Invisible zippers are most often seen in the center back or side of garments, as well as in home deck accessories. This zipper application is often thought of as very difficult to do. However, it's really one of the easiest when you use the invisible zipper foot. The invisible zipper is sewn to the garment before the seam is sewn, instead of afterward, which is just opposite of other types of zipper applications such as centered or lapped zippers. It is helpful to apply fusible interfacing to the wrong side of the seam allowances, particularly when working with stretchy or unstable fabric. Cut 2 pieces of interfacing 1/2 inch wide and about 1 inch longer than the zipper itself. Then, fuse to the wrong sides of the seam allowances. Press the zipper coils flat with a cool iron. Pin the right side of the zipper to the right side of the garment. Place the zipper so that the coil sits on the seam line and the top of the zipper is 3/4 of an inch below the top raw edge of the fabric. Stitch with the right slot of the presser foot over the coil. Then, pin the other side of the zipper tape to the right side of the other garment section. Stitch with the coil in the left slot of the foot. Place the regular zipper foot on the machine so the foot is to the left of the needle. Set the needle in the far right position. Close the zipper, then sew the rest of the seam. The adjustable zipper cording foot has a screw on the back, making it possible to move the foot manually to the left or right. This is great for creating piping or cording because the foot can be adjusted manually so that you can sew very closely to the piping when creating or inserting it. Just cover the cord with a strip of fabric, then stitch to encase the cord. It can now be applied to your project. You can use fabric cut with the grain for piping that will be sewn into straight edges, or fabric cut on the bias for piping that will be sewn into curved areas. The blind hem foot makes it quick and easy to sew hems on garments and home deck projects. There are various styles of blind hem feet, but what they have in common is an extension at the front of the foot for guiding the fabric fold. To make a blind hem, first turn the hem up to the depth you want, then press. Finish the raw edge of the fabric with a zigzag stitch, over edge stitch, or trim with pinking shears. Pin the hem in place. Fold the fabric back like this so that it is against the right side of the fabric, with the top edge of the hem extending about 1/4 inch to the right side of the folded fabric. Reposition the pins to secure the fold. Start sewing slowly at the fabric fold. If you catch too much of the fabric into the stitch, adjust the width of the stitch so that you only catch 1 or 2 threads of the fold with the stitch. This is important so that stitches are not visible on the right side of the project. If your blind hem foot has an adjustment screw on the side, you can use this to reposition the fabric fold so that you only catch 1 or 2 stitches of the fold without having to change the width of the stitch. If your style of blind hem foot does not have the adjustment screw on the side, you will need to adjust the stitch width. When finished sewing, unfold the fabric and then press. The overedge foot is used when adding a seam finish at the edge of a seam allowance. There is a small bridge on the foot which allows more thread into the stitch. Fabric is guided along the extension at the front of the foot. When sewing is completed, the seam finish and fabric lay smoothly instead of bunching up along the edge, providing a neat appearance. The button sewing foot is used to easily attach buttons, whether they are 2-hole or 4-hole buttons. It holds the button securely in place while a zigzag stitch is used to attach the button. If the machine has a drop feed lever, lower the feed dogs. If the machine does not have a drop feed lever, then place a feed dog cover plate over the feed dogs or simply set the stitch length to 0. Place the button into position on the project. Lower the presser foot over the button. Set the machine for a zigzag stitch. Turn the hand wheel slowly to make sure that the swing of the needle clears the holes of the button. Then, sew about 6 to 8 stitches. To finish, set the machine for straight stitch in left needle position and sew 2 to 3 stitches to tie off. For a 4-hole button, simply repeat this process for the opposite holes. The darning embroidery foot is used for free motion work. The most common type of free motion work is called stippling. Remove the regular presser foot and shank. Place the darning embroidery foot on the machine, making sure that the arm is resting over the needle bar. Tighten the side screw so that the foot is on the machine securely. Place batting in between the top fabric and backing fabric. Secure by pinning or basting together. Disengage the feed dogs. Set the machine for straight stitch. Thread the machine, then turn the hand wheel to draw up the bobbin thread. Lower the presser foot. Hold the fabric with 2 hands and then begin stitching in a meandering fashion, removing the pins as you go. Keep a moderately fast speed on the foot control while moving the fabric. The even feed foot is sometimes called the walking foot or dual feed foot. It works just like another set of feed dogs, helping to feed fabric through the stitching area. Use this foot to prevent shifting of quilt layers or shifting of seams in fabrics like velvet or corduroy. Remove the regular foot and shank. The even feed foot is then placed so that its arm is resting on the needle bar. Once it is in position, tighten the side screw. Secure the materials together, then sew. The 1/4-inch foot is most commonly used for quilting, but it can also be used for craft sewing. Pieced quilts are sewn with a 1/4-inch seam allowance. It's important to the overall quality of the quilt that the seams are sewn accurately. Use the edge of the presser foot as a guide for sewing a 1/4-inch seam. Sew and be sure to press the seam allowances before joining to the next piece. For best results, use a rotary cutter, mat, and ruler to cut fabrics. Fabrics that have cleanly cut edges will be easier to sew accurately. The open toe foot has a large open area in the front of the foot, providing a large view of your work, which is very helpful when decorative stitching or couching over ribbons and trims. For example, to do this decorative embellishment, place a ribbon on top of the fabric with a lightweight tearaway or water-soluble stabilizer underneath to help the stitches sew smoothly. Select a decorative stitch wide enough to cover the ribbon, then sew. Remove the stabilizer when finished. The edge joining foot is used for joining trims or fabrics. For example, Place a fabric, which has been turned under and pressed, next to a lace trim. A tearaway or water-soluble stabilizer should then be placed underneath. Select your stitch. Sew, joining the lace and fabric together. Remove the stabilizer when finished. The pintuck foot has several evenly spaced grooves on the bottom, which allow for sewing parallel rows of stitching closely together. It is used, along with a twin needle, to create wonderful surface texture on fabrics, very commonly seen on many garments as well as home dec accessories. The needle tension may be tightened to increase the depth of the tuck. After sewing the first tuck, place the fabric under the foot again, with the previously sewn tuck under one of the grooves of the foot. Continue to sew until the desired number of rows has been created for the project. Because creating pin tucks will cause the fabric to draw in, do all tucked rows and then cut out the fabric from the pattern piece. Another very interesting effect can be achieved by first sewing several parallel rows, spaced as desired, depending on the look you want. After the first rows have been stitched, sew parallel rows again, the same distance apart, but at a 90-degree angle, to create textured squares in the fabric. The ruffler makes it possible to quickly and easily sew projects that have long sections of ruffles or pleats, and the results look professional. Remove the regular shank and foot. Attach the ruffler, making sure the arm is around the needle bar, then tighten the side screw. The adjustment setting on the side of the ruffler controls the depth of the tuck, and the other adjustment on the top controls how often the tuck forms. It can be set to tuck every 12 stitches, every 6 stitches, every stitch, or not at all. The more often it pleats, the more fullness it makes. The other adjustment controls how deep a tuck the ruffler makes. Smaller pleats will result in softer ruffles, and deeper tucks will create fuller ruffles. The cording foot has grooves on the top, which are used to guide a yarn or cord. Stitches are sewn over cords placed into the foot, as the foot guides them evenly. To do fabric embellishment, place up to 3 cords into the grooves of the foot. Thread the machine, and then choose a decorative stitch wide enough to cover the cords being guided through the presser foot. To create gathers, tie a knot in the cord's end, then place the cord into the foot's center groove, then behind the foot. Sew a zigzag stitch over the cord, being careful not to catch the cord with the stitch. When finished, the cord can be used to adjust fullness. The sew and serge foot, also known as a side cutter, trims excess fabric while sewing. The machine is set for an overedge stitch with the width set at its widest setting. The seam is sewn, finished, and trimmed all at once. Remove the regular presser foot and shank. Attach the cutter, making sure the cutter's arm fits around the needle bar. Tighten the side screw. Guide the fabric here for a 5/8 inch seam allowance, or here for a 1/2 inch seam allowance. With the presser foot down, slowly turn the hand wheel to make sure that the needle goes over the stitch finger on the cutter. Cut a notch at the beginning of the fabric because the cutter's blade cuts prior to the needle stitching. place the fabric over the first metal platform and then under the second metal platform. Sew slowly. There are a few things you should do periodically to keep your machine running at its best. However, you should have your machine professionally serviced at regular intervals. It's a good idea to clean around the feed dogs to remove any lint or thread bits from the whole area. If your machine manual instructs you to do so, lubricate with a drop of sewing machine oil according to the directions in the manual. Use only sewing machine oil, which is available from your Singer retailer. After oiling, be sure to sew on a scrap fabric to make sure the oil dissipates before sewing on your project. From time to time, your machine may not seem to be working properly. These problems are most often completely preventable. Let's take a look at a few common problems you could run into and how to correct them. When you sew, if you find that you have a lot of thread accumulating on the underside of the fabric, this means that you have actually threaded the upper thread incorrectly. Raise the presser foot lifter. Cut the upper thread and remove it. To make sure you have threaded the machine correctly, try this simple test. Leave the needle unthreaded and the presser foot up. Pull the upper thread toward you. It should pull freely. Now, put the presser foot lifter down and try pulling the needle thread. It should resist the pulling. If you are still able to pull the upper thread freely when the presser foot is down, this is an indication that the tension is not correctly threaded. Raise the presser foot and then completely remove the upper thread. After you have rethreaded the upper thread, put the presser foot down. If you do feel a significant difference in the tension when you pull the thread, you are now ready to thread the needle. Raise the presser foot, thread the needle, and sew. If the needle keeps breaking, check that you have the correct needle size for the fabric you're sewing. Remember, thicker fabrics require larger size needles so that they're strong enough to go through the thickness. Also, check that the machine controls are set properly for the stitch and presser foot that you are using. If your upper thread is breaking, check that you have correctly threaded the machine. Check to see if the thread groove of the thread spool itself is pointed toward the right so the thread isn't getting caught. Be sure the tension control is set correctly. If you have removed the bobbin case and reinserted it incorrectly, this could also be causing thread breakage. Check that your bobbin is free of nicks or chips around the edges as well. If your fabric doesn't seem to be moving well under the presser foot, check to see that your foot is correctly attached. Also, make sure the feed dogs are not disengaged. Check your stitch length as well.